Hi everyone, thank you very much. Yeah, Mark Tyson, Mark, are you here? Is he still here? No, I kind of feel like he was my warm-up act at this point. It was a little bit strange. Anyway, so air, it's incredibly important. Yeah, it really, really is. But how much time do we actually really spend thinking about it? I would suggest not enough. However, if your circumstances were to change dramatically and you were to find yourself actually thinking about all the elements that contribute to your survival, you would probably have to follow the rule of three. The rule of three tells us that in 3 weeks, without food you will die, without water 3 days, without shelter in extreme conditions, in inverted commas, 3 hours, but without air, just 3 minutes. So in essence, no air, no you. You can live 10,000 times longer without food than you can air. That's how important it is. But we don't think about it. We really don't. We think about our food, we think about our water, we think about our shelter. But we don't think about our air. Not really. Why? Because as Abraham Maslow tells us, the godfather of needs-based psychology, a satisfied need no longer motivates. We breathe, we continue to live, we don't think about it. And so we don't put any effort into it. But should we? Well, as Mark said this morning, yes, we really should. And what I want to talk about over the next sort of 15 minutes or so is what happens if our air quality is improved? What happens if actually it degrades? And how would we know? And what should we do about it if we do discover that that has happened? So, I'm Steve Smith, as we said, the sales director from Asset Mapping. We're an Internet Things platform that kind of bring all this data together. And I'm going to take you through 3 areas, so a second rule of 3 if you like. The mind, body and productivity, sorry. Mind, body and soul would sound nicer, wouldn't it? But I don't have data in relation to air quality for the soul. I'm sure walking the countryside will be good for that. But we'll go through mind, body and productivity over the next few minutes. I'm going to start with the mind, and I'm going to directly link this to cognitive function. I'm sure we all know that cognitive function is essentially an expression of how smart we are at any one point in time. There's about 9 different measures. Francesca Brady, sitting over there, who works for me, who has a master's in environmental sciences and wrote a thesis on air quality. We'll go into the detail if you wish to. However, in essence, there's 9 different areas. Things like the ability to strategize, focus on the task at hand, gather information, so on and so on. And those measures can be measured against what happens when, for example, CO2 or VOCs, volatile organic compounds in the air, smells, as somebody was talking about smells earlier on, in some instances are exactly that, VOCs. We're going to focus on CO2. We're going to talk about if you're in an office with elevated CO2, what does that mean? Well, it could essentially mean that you're drunk. That might sound absurd, but I promise you it's not. The science supports this. The science does support this. And I will tell you why. The symptoms of being moderately intoxicated, fatigue, nausea, dizziness, they mirror the same symptoms of having an elevated level of CO2. It's really not very healthy. If we draw a line actually looking at the comparative kind of effects of these two things, they're incredibly close. 0.1%, the 0.10 that you see there, of blood alcohol concentration is the equivalent of an 11.6% degradation of your cognitive function. The science is in on that. I'm not taking questions. The other line, where we're looking at CO2, there we're talking about approximately 1,000 parts per million. That's your average office, by the way. You're about 11% degraded in terms of your cognitive function. Not in every area, but when you look at the 9 across them, you will see that. 0.1% of blood alcohol concentration, just so we're clear, is about 2 pints of lager for the average man. It's about 1.5 pints for the ladies. At 0.08% blood alcohol concentration, you shouldn't drive your car. It's 2 pints, 11.6% degraded cognitive function, don't drive your car. Let's go back to our graph. At 1,000 parts per million, you're sitting in the boardroom making important decisions. Should you? Lloyds don't think so, if we compare the alcohol thing. Lloyds said last year, sent a message out, banning daytime drinking. Drinking alcohol affects individuals differently. A zero limit is therefore simpler, more consistent, and in line with the modern global and high-performance culture that we want to embrace. So if Lloyds take drinking seriously at any level, and I'd challenge you to drink more than 2 pints in your lunchtime. Don't take me up on that. But we would struggle. If they take it that seriously, then why don't we address CO2 more? Why don't we do it? Well, there's a few reasons. Possibly we don't know what the CO2 in our offices looks like. Possibly it's that. Possibly we think it's too expensive to address. Probably got a few people that think that might be the case as well. Well, Harvard did a study. So somebody's done it for you. Harvard did a study on this already. They worked out that for $40 per person per year, they could double the ventilation rate in the building. By doing that, they could lower the CO2 from 1,000 parts per million to 600 parts per million. The effect of that? An 8% uptick in productivity equivalent to $6,500 per person per year productivity. I'll take that because that's 162.5% ROI. So if you want to take those numbers to your CFO, we'll happily give you the study. It's not ours. It comes from Syracuse University. There's a COG-FX. Francesca will give you the exact link. COG-FX study. There's a whole website devoted to it now. The science is in. It's only a matter for us to now go and execute on it. So, cognitive function, the mind, and the impact of air quality on that. Mind, body, and productivity. So let's talk about the body. I, as was Mark this morning, am more concerned about our health right now. The more I look into this, the more it scares me. Here's 2 glasses of water. Right, who in the audience would like to drink glass A? Put your hands up, or glass B? A? Who wants to drink glass A?
Which one's A?
That's the first one, A, B. Reading left to right. Yeah, no problem. On your left, glass A. Just to make sure no one was confused by that. Right, okay, glass B, anyone? No, that would be lunatic. Oh, did you say glass B? Get out. No, joking. It might be. It's not. It is, we wouldn't drink polluted water, right? Now, can I get the opinion on building A or B for the air contained therein? Who wants to breathe the air in building A? We don't know. We don't know, because we don't know. Right? We can't make that decision, not as tenants, not as landlords, not as, on any part. We don't know because we don't know what's in those buildings necessarily. We could look for somebody like the IWBI. We could go to IWBI, we could go to WellFit, and there are other people. We could talk to the UK Green Building Council. We could go all the way up to change to someone like Delos doing the research. We could look for a certified building, and that will help. And they don't just certify air quality. They look at things like mental health and those other areas that are really important, and they help us define buildings that should be better for the human beings they're in. However, they measure at points in time, so they'll make a measurement, and they'll say, yes, well done, you passed the test, you're bronze, silver, gold, platinum. And then they might come back a year later, but what if we want to know how this thing changes day to day? What if we want to do that? Well, we should be focused primarily, I would suggest, on particulate matter. That's the measure of pollution. There's various different ways of looking at particulate matter. We've got PM2.5, 10, these are essentially the size, the micron width of the particulate matter. So at 2.5, it's less than the width of a human hair or even a grain of sand. 10 is sort of your average sort of dust. But 2.5 is incredibly unhealthy for us. It's the byproduct of things like combustion engines. So diesel's in focus at the moment, but really any engine or anything else producing those kind of pollutants. And at 2.5 microns, it can pass through the walls of your lung, and that's incredibly dangerous to our health. It can cause asthma. And at the very worst case scenario, it will promote cancer within your respiratory system. Put it in context, I took this, not last night, but the night before, the air quality index in London on that day. If you look at the top of the various different graphs, obviously the aggregated score of 55, but we can see there that the PM 2.5 index for the day ranged between 9 and 81, is it? 85, sorry, 19 and 85. 85 micrograms per meters cubed. We can do the same measurement on our buildings as well when we want to. But the point I'm making here is that studies in the US that were around over 7 years by the Environmental Protection Agency showed that if you reduce by 10 microns per meters cubed a person's pollution, they'll live 0.35 years longer. Get it down by 30, that's over a year's worth of more life for your employees and your staff and other people that you have a duty of care to. So we aren't talking about our outdoor air quality though, we're talking about buildings. However, some buildings do have a problem. We don't necessarily know they have a problem, but again, other studies have shown us that building indoor air quality can be 2 to 5 times worse in many instances. And we need to help address this because we spend 90% of our time indoors. So if we want our staff to be like this lady, live long, happy lives, creative, fully functioning, and lots of energy, we need to start measuring this, understanding it, and taking steps. We know about traditional solutions like HEPA filter, but if we look to areas, to countries like China, where they're looking harder and harder at this, we've got new UV systems that can eradicate that pollution from the air before it reaches the inside of the building. You know, there's ways of doing it. Now, interestingly, Mark alluded to this as well earlier. If you don't want to look at it in the positive light, I'll show you a different lady. Does anyone know who this lady is? This lady's name is Clotilde Nonnet. She lives in Paris. She's lived there for 30 years, and last June she sued the government for the severe respiratory conditions that she suffers from because of the level of pollution in Paris. It won't be long before Mark's prophecy comes true. People, I don't know Mark, by the way, we've never met, but people will come to your office via a wearable or their phone or a device like this one, and they'll start to measure the air quality in your buildings. And after a few years, they'll have enough data set aside that it will not be difficult for them to prove to a court that actually you broke your fiduciary duty to them to take care of their health and that they're now sick. That's a dark line, and it's not one I want to follow. I want us to think about achieving that, not preventing that. But it's a very real threat. We need to do something about it. So, productivity. Let's talk about that area, our third rule, if you like. We know that temperature is a pain. We know, I get it. I've not been in this industry long, but I know how many phone calls you guys get if you're in FM. Temperature is that combination of straight out temperature measurement and humidity. Actually, the two things give you that relative combination that tell you whether somebody's hot or cold. 94% of FMs get complaints about cold spots. 92 get them about hot spots. I think that number's really 100, but that's what the information that we have tells us. 94, 92. And of course, the standard reaction is to we've got to stop that cycle of people phoning us. So a lot of people tell me, and I'm telling you what they tell me, that the reaction ends up being something like this. We eventually put in a dummy thermostat near the manager's desk, and it made her very happy, but it wasn't attached to anything. A placebo works every time. I've got news for you. Placebos don't work, that's the point. They're based on belief, and yes, they make people feel better. They do, for a period of time, but they're based on belief. So as soon as that belief drops, they feel worse again. The more that cycle repeats, the less effective it is, the more complaints you get. It's a vicious cycle. The data, let's talk about data again, tells us differently. This is all the aggregated studies that I can find on the subject of thermal comfort and the impact on productivity. We lose £13 billion a year in the UK due to thermal discomfort. Those studies are showing us that there is a sweet spot in these studies between 21 and 25 degrees. CIBSE tells us the UK winter, summer, 21, 23 to 22, 24. But what this shows us in general is that above 25 degrees, productivity falls off enormously, and below as well. Not all the studies were measuring the cold, but you can see that that happens as well. So there is a direct correlation to how people work and how hard they can work and how focused they are. The studies around the hot areas, if you like, are quite easy. They're very, very good. You can see that they factored in things like body mass, sex, clothing, outdoor climate. They worked all of these things in to really try and understand the effect on people. And through all of those combinations of information, they came up with this formula, which looks initially complicated until you realize what it means is, for every degree above 25 degrees, you lose 2% of productivity. It's that simple. It's not hard. It's not. That's really the output. What about when it's cold? It's the same, more or less. I've heard people say it's much higher, but there's something else you need to factor in. Rather than simply say lost productivity is higher, productivity falls by about the same rate, but error rates increase. It was done with a typing test. It was purely on that basis, but errors in the typing of the participants increased by nearly 15% as it got colder and colder. So You're losing the same amount of productivity, but people are also making mistakes, many more mistakes. It's difficult to express that as a straight productivity. I'd say it's 2% up, 2% down. The only person laughing about this situation is that man, because the whole thermal systems that we set up and the way we engineer it are based on the 1960s man who's about 70 kilos wearing a heavy wool suit. I'm not kidding. That's the standard that most engineering systems are based on still. Now, I'm laughing about it, but I also think it's time to change. And there's lots of ways we can do that, even with the systems that are in place now. There are ways to address this. So mind, body, and productivity, or CO2, PM2.5, and temperature. Now you can expand that slightly. You can say CO2 and VOCs. The two things go hand in hand, actually. VOCs are gases. They're a combination of all the different kind of volatile organic compounds in your air. 2.5 and 10 are just two different expressions of the kind of pollutants we have. 2.5 is much more dangerous to our health than 10. And temperature and humidity. So there's really 6 measures there. As Mark said earlier on, yes, light and noise, absolutely, but melanopic light. We should care about light, but we should care about the colour of the light. We should go further than that. And noise, yeah, noise, we should measure it. Use barometric pressure, don't use microphones or you'll have all kinds of privacy problems. But there's ways of doing that too. These things all contribute, but we're talking about air quality today. So the question obviously becomes, and I'm going to have a little sip of water if that's okay, what do we do about it? Well, asset mapping, we have the asset mapping platform. I'm only going to show this to you, but I'm just saying generically, there are a lot of people that do what we do. I'm saying these technologies are out there. You can map your buildings. You can place sensors, exactly like this one, all around the building, and they will measure all of those elements for you. That one will do light, noise, and the 6 air quality pieces. You put them all around the building, you can create a proper heat map of your space, so if the wind blows through it, you'll see it moving through the building. You'll know everything there is to know about it. You can then attach the live data to it. So having digitally created that map of your building and added the sensors to it, we can then start to track all of those elements that we've been talking about. We can see everything in real time. And if you choose a system with an unlimited user base, you can offer that up to everybody else. We talked about the scoreboard earlier on. You can have dashboards for all of the relevant people, and those dashboards can create alerts to the teams in FM so that you know about a situation regarding the temperature or the levels of CO2 or anything else in your building before necessarily the tenants do, and you can act on it. You can be that proactive person that comes and says, right, we come sort this out because we see the temperature's falling, and it shouldn't be. We can look at and monitor things like cooling demand versus cooling valve. Is the cooling demand up but the cooling valve isn't open? We can do those things too. This is an Internet of Things platform. We can connect everything to it. Beyond that, and in our very next release, and I apologise for the spelling, if you look up the top it says cognitive. I think our Spanish UX designers had had too much CO2 at the time as well. This is the scoreboard. I don't know Mark. So when he talks about these things earlier on, I sat laughing in the back. This is the scoreboard. This is going to be the way that we're going to make it easily understandable for everybody. You will know your air quality score, you will know your productivity score, you will know your cognitive function score, and you will know what's contributing to it or not. And because we're an IoT platform, or if you choose other people that can do this, you pull the occupancy data in. So we know that 10 people work in that area there, and we know that their air quality is that, and we know how many hours of lost productivity that's generated. And from that, we can justify to the CFO that we do need better HVAC systems and airflow. And finally, you can then link that data back to the BMS across your whole estate. You can create one overarching rule set about how you want to maintain things, or 100 different rule sets if you want to, and then apply it back into the BMS. So you can actually write that back, or you can just send the data to the BMS and program it at the local level. That's up to you, but this is what IoT platforms can do for you. You can take third-party sensor data and then relay it back into the BMS so it can make better decisions. There's a company called Disruptive Technologies. They have a Scrabble tile-sized sensor that measures temperature incredibly accurately. They drop it in concrete so they can tell when it's cured, believe it or not. It talks over LoRa. That's how it uses it. It's got kilometres worth of range. It lasts 15 years, and to install it, all you do is take the sticky back plastic off and stick it on the wall. We've done this for a large telecoms company across one of their major innovation floors. We put them everywhere, and the data we gathered was unbelievable about how badly thermally managed this space was. And we figured out that it was all emanating from one area of the building, and we fixed that, and so on and so forth. But it's easy to find this information when we go to sort of technologies that are more affordable and easier to connect up. So mind, body, productivity, and the answers to that, I'm done. Because it's that simple. But if you have questions, I'm here now. We're also over there as well. Francesca's here to answer questions about air quality. Paul, my asset integrity manager, is in the back there as well. So questions now? I was either really clear or you don't believe me.
What about the environmental impact of
Turning up the air. So, yeah, okay, I get it. We're consuming more energy. But that's almost inevitable in some ways. Really, the answer to that is more renewables or flex on the grid. Being able to draw energy back from certain systems. We've been talking to National Grid about the idea of using the network as an enormous battery, essentially, and how we can enable things like that. There are fantastic startups in the UK. One, for example, out of Birmingham called GridEdge, a group of PhD, it's not students now, graduates, who are writing the machine learning algorithms that can turn that up and down. We're going to have to accept some increase in our consumption of energy. It's how we generate that energy that's more important, in my opinion.
Question. So I'm from the Met Office. We've
Uh-huh.
got plenty of people that understand all of this. So anything we do is always going to be scrutinised. So what we've been doing just this last winter,
Yeah.
thinking that there was going to be a flu epidemic, for instance, is put another layer of filtration. We dare not tell everybody about that because they'd be analysing it to death. Have you come across that problem?
Not in general, no. I'll give you a couple of examples of things where problems have been caused, though, where originally we tried techniques like giving people the ability to vote on the temperature that they wanted, providing more data that way. All that does is create unrest, because half of you vote one way and the other half vote the other, and no one gets the temperature they actually want. So then we said, well, let's flip that. Why don't we just expose the data of what the temperatures are around people's office? And then people can, if you've got an agile work scheme like you have at AstraZeneca, they can go and find the spot that's warm or cold enough for them. Makes it easier. But in general, no, we don't have it. We want to be transparent. We did have one example where I'll anonymise it. We found a meeting room with 3,000 parts per million CO2, and the tenant and the landlord gained access to the information simultaneously, which is how the whole thing was set up. The landlord was very upset. It was on that side. They said, you've made us look bad. And we said, we really didn't. That wasn't the intention. But there can be those kind of conflicts. That's lessons learned from our side. How do we manage those things better for people? So those kind of conflicts we've come across, or where people have scrutinised it and it's created tension. Tenant said, we're not paying for that. We're not paying the rent on that area. We're going to reduce it by that amount. The landlord felt that we'd stabbed them in the back. So all we did was provide the data. So, and that was how it was set up. But those kind of things can happen.
Excuse me, you talked about return on investment. How do you change the mindset of the corporate occupier? How are your corporate occupiers are really interested?
So, sorry, just to explain the corporate.
So you've got a return on investment, why this is important.
Yeah.
It's the workplace, and the workplace is driven by well-being at the moment. That's the latest driver of the industry. So how many corporate occupiers are really interested in this and actually taking it on board?
Right, so interestingly, we tend to find that human resources so far have not been that interested, bizarrely. They tend to say, well, we've got more important things. Or, however, when we started talking to some legal firms where people are their collateral and essentially they've got that requirement to fee earn and it's all linked down to the hourly rate and the productivity and everything else, then it was much more widely accepted. It is difficult. It's not an easy sell. Wellness, unfortunately, despite the kind of the momentum behind it at the moment, people aren't necessarily kind of grabbing it with both hands because they don't, honestly, I think they don't believe the science. I mean, we didn't do it, but we need to get people over that hump. Once they believe it, they'll do it. The other area is actually JLL released not very long ago at all, a really interesting study on how this is improving the value of the building. So forget about the occupier. The people that own the building should be interested in this. The actual estate owners, the big investments, the Brookfields, the CBRE Globals, the JLLs. They should want their buildings to look like this. From a talent attraction and retention perspective, it also has quite a lot to offer. So you're right, this isn't a pool market. I'm not getting phone calls every 5 minutes saying, can I have some more of your air quality systems? But we're educating. And I think there are many, many good reasons to do it, and as I mentioned, perhaps one quite dark reason to do it. But it will come, it will come. Game theory suggests it has to. Someone will move, someone will make a lot of noise about how their buildings are healthier, their firm is healthier, and everyone will follow. That's what I believe, or I wouldn't be here.
Steve, thank you.
Oh, sorry, I might have time.
Just about. It's
Okay.
interesting, this whole thing about data, and people don't believe data. And I think that's our role, isn't it, to take that data, and we have to believe it, and then we have to be able to persuade people in our organisations. It's exactly what we were saying, I think, in the first panel. You know, we've got to do that selling job. We've got to talk the language of the business and share the information before someone takes legal action. Because, otherwise the bandwagon's gone past, hasn't it, when someone starts to take legal action.
I think just kind of the final note is there's no shame in saying I'm going to do it small to begin with. I'm going to do a small area. We're going to track that team. We're going to look how it affects them. We're going to run our own control. Do that, and then roll it out, because it will prove itself. I'm confident of that.
What's the air quality like in here, would you say? Do we all have to go home now and go outside?
There is a display on here. It's actually very good. 21 degrees, 38% humidity, 468 parts per million CO2, which is amazing, and 0 PM 2.5.
So we're all going to be super productive
We
today.
live here.
Wow, we'll just move in forever.
In all seriousness, congratulations to the venue. The score on the device is saying 93. I see that rarely in commercial spaces. That's 94 it just went up to out of 100. Sorry? Well, technically, no. It's not surrounded by industry. It's not on the A40 into London. You know, there are areas of London that are obviously clearly worse than others. And
Well done, Tasker Racecourse. And Steve, thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Steve.